Hi, I'm Brandon. Thank you for joining me for my second assignment for contemporary children's literature. I'm going to talk about my new favorite book, Artemis Fowl by Eoin Colfer. And what I'm going to talk about in particular is the adaptation of Artemis Fowl to the graphic novel. What was gained and what was lost when they adapted it to the graphic novel. Before I get into the book, though, I want to talk a little bit about Eoin Colfer, the author of the book. Eoin Colfer and his four brothers were born in Ireland. His father was an elementary school teacher, a historian, and an artist, and his mother taught drama. Eoin first started writing stories in elementary school, based on the Vikings he was learning about. He got his degree from Dublin University, and then worked as an elementary school teacher. He married in 1991, and he and his wife spent 4 years working in Saudi Arabia, Tunisia, and Italy. In 1998, Eoin published his first book, Benny and Omar, based on his experiences in Tunisia. In 2001, the first Artemis Fowl book was published, and Eoin was able to concentrate solely on writing. Before I compare the novel and the graphic novel, you need to know a little about the plot. I don't want to tell you too much, because you should check it out for yourself, but I do want to give you a little bit of information about what this story is about. Artemis Fowl follows a plot structure described by Les Edgerton in his instructional writing book, Hooked. Edgerton wrote that the best stories begin with an inciting incident that leads to the surface problem, which then leads the protagonist to the story problem, which is what the story will really be about. In Artemis Fowl, the inciting incident comes to light when a troll makes its way from the center of the earth to the surface. Holly, an elf who works as a police officer for the Recon unit, Leprechaun, get it? Has to travel to the surface of the earth to find the troll. But she is low on magic because she hasn't performed the ritual in years, and she doesn't want to tell her commander this. Holly saves the humans, but her boss realizes she's out of magic and sends her to perform the ritual to replenish herself. This is when the story problem, as Les Edgerton calls it, begins. Colfer uses the damsel in distress storyline, with Holly getting kidnapped by Artemis Fowl, the story's antagonist. Artemis Fowl II is a 12-year-old genius who wants to make his family rich again by stealing gold from the fairies. He kidnaps Holly in hopes that a ransom will be paid for her safe return. In the novel, a narrator provides foreshadowing of what's to come. For instance, on page 40, when Commander Root sends Holly to find the troll, the narrator says, "Root was right to be nervous. If he'd known how this straightforward recon assignment was going to turn out, he would probably have retired then and there. Tonight, history was going to be made, and it wasn't the discovery of radium, first man on the moon, happy kind of history. It was the Spanish Inquisition. Here comes the Hindenburg, bad kind of history. Bad for humans and fairies, bad for everyone." The narrator seems to take a step back in the graphic novel. In the graphic novel, the story is narrated more by the characters. For instance, both books start with a first-person report about the boy genius, Artemis Fowl, but in the graphic novel, it's unclear who has written this report. This passage is from that opening page in the novel and the graphic novel. I've put together this report from first-hand interviews with the victims, and as the tale unfolds, you will realize that this was not easy. At the end of the novel, there is an epilogue that finalizes the report. It is signed off by Dr. J. Argonne, a psychology expert writing for the LEP Academy files. It says the report's details are 94% accurate and 6% unavoidable extrapolation. That second part of the narrative frame was missing from the graphic novel. If you only read the graphic novel, it would be unclear who had created the report at the beginning. To add information that was lost without the narrator, the graphic novel has pages that appear to be from the report, and they're included throughout the book. These pages describe Artemis, his father, Holly Short, Fowl Manor, Julius Root, the Troll, and more. One element that is confusing in the novel is the use of multiple points of view in the same chapter. Using an omnipotent narrator was popular when Ernest Hemingway used to write, but it's a style that is less used now because it's kind of difficult to follow. Fiction editor Beth Hill wrote in her editor's blog that it's best to change points of view at a chapter break or at a scene break, clearly marked in the text, when readers are prepared for a possible change in point of view or viewpoint character. The first chapter in the novel was particularly confusing. It starts with the narrator describing Ho Chi Minh City in the summer. Artemis is described as being in a bad mood when he and Butler, the boy's bodyguard, are talking at an outdoor cafe. As a reader, I thought we were seeing the story through Artemis's point of view. Then, they're approached by a man pretending to be their waiter. On page 5, the reader is then in the mind of that man, Win, who is leading them to a ferry. Here's an excerpt from that part. Win had heard the name Fowl before. Who hadn't in the international underworld? But he'd assumed he'd be dealing with Artemis Sr., not this boy, though the word boy hardly seemed to do this gaunt individual justice. In the graphic novel, Win's thought in that chapter was omitted. The graphic novel seems to be more clear about point of view. When you're in the mind of certain characters in the graphic novel, their thoughts are in a rectangular box that is consistently the same color throughout the book. For instance, Holly's box is a light green. Artemis's box is mauve. The use of first-person, present tense point of view for Artemis and Holly was particularly effective in the graphic novel. Let's compare. In the graphic novel, in chapter 6, when Juliet tells Artemis that his father is with his mother, he thinks, "I feel a lead ball drop in my stomach. Guilt tears at my insides. I've been thinking about our little fairy friend so much that I had given up." In the novel, Artemis is described as thinking these things. Artemis felt a lead ball drop in his stomach. For a split second, Artemis could have sworn his heart had stopped. Father? Back? Was it possible? Of course, he'd always believed his father was alive. But lately, since he'd hatched this fairy scheme, it was almost as if his father had shifted to the back of his mind. Artemis felt guilt churn his stomach. He had given up on his own father. Another element that was gained in the graphic novel are the images themselves. Giovanni Regano drew the images by hand for the graphic novel, and then Paolo Lamanna colored them using a computer program. And in some instances, they actually look almost real. They are definitely very, very stunning. And as much as you can read a book and get an image in your head, it's a different experience when you can actually see the image. As a reader, I would have to say that I enjoyed the Artemis Fowl book a little bit more than the Artemis Fowl graphic novel. And the reason for that is I've always enjoyed reading a book and taking my time with it. And the graphic novel went by a little faster. It took about a week to read the book and about 2 or 2.5 days to read the graphic novel. Otherwise, I would say that they're fairly comparable and each of them has their own strengths.